Good morning and welcome to a special edition of Newsline. We're joining you from the official residence of the Canadian High Commissioner in Colombo, Her Excellency Shelley Whiting. Let's say very good morning to Her Excellency. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Sonali. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you for having us here. High Commissioner, it's significant that the Regional Young Women Leaders Dialogue just concluded here in Colombo. What is the significance of this initiative?
This is an initiative that was developed by Canadian diplomatic missions in South Asia, both embassies and high commissions. It builds on a very successful initiative we had last year, which we tagged FemParl, which brought together women parliamentarians from South Asia to talk about some of the barriers, some of the obstacles they had faced as women politicians. It was a very successful event, and in part because we had such tremendous support from our Sri Lankan partners, not only the Women's Caucus, but also the Speaker and the Office of Parliament. And it was an opportunity to tease out some of the barriers of why women weren't getting into politics. We decided this year that we would do a build-on or a follow-on to that initiative, but our entry point was going to be youth. So we've got young women leaders here from across South Asia, and it builds on shared experiences, not only here in South Asia, but also in Canada, where we have had challenges with women's participation in political life.
This year's conference is themed on catalysts for political engagement, empowerment, and participation of young women leaders. What are some of the obstacles that women face in general?
My sense from the discussions we've had is in terms of just sometimes that politics has been the purview of families or elites. It is difficult for young women, perhaps in rural communities or without financial assets, to get into politics. And then it's convincing political parties to put women on their slates or to support them as candidates. We were very encouraged last year to see the Sri Lankan Parliament adopt a quota which will ensure that a number of seats in the next local elections are reserved for women. But it's not just creating entry points, it's also what can we do to ensure there's an environment where women feel comfortable. We've reduced harassment in Parliament and as women campaign. But there are others on this panel who are more qualified than I to speak to some of those challenges, and I'm sure they'll tease out some of those more specific examples of barriers for women's political participation.
High Commissioner Whiting, thank you very much. We are also joined by Catherine Fortin-Lefebvre of Equal Voice Canada. She's intent on getting more women in elected office. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
How significant is the role of the woman in ensuring that her ideas, her thoughts, and her concepts are in legislature as well?
Well, at Equal Voice, we believe that the more diverse a decision-making table is, the better policy will come out of it. And it's just common sense. If you think about it, in Canada, the population is 51% female, yet in our House of Commons, we have a 26% representation of women. So clearly, there's a big difference. Although we do have a gender parity cabinet that our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau appointed over a year ago, which we were very happy about.
In fact, your Prime Minister himself has said that he is a feminist.
Yes, and if you understand the definition of feminist as being equal rights for everybody, then most people should be feminists. But we're not too hung up on labels. We basically want to ensure that there is a better representation of women at all levels of government. And we're seeing in Canada that we still have a long ways to go.
Catherine, you have an interesting initiative called Daughters of the Vote. What is this all about?
So we're very excited in the context of the commemoration of the 100 years since women started to have the right to vote in Canada. It didn't happen right away, but some women started 100 years ago. So we're commemorating that by bringing 338 young women aged 18 to 23 to the House of Commons in Canada's national capital, Ottawa, for International Women's Day. Now, 338 because we have 338 members of Parliament. So these women will represent all of the federal ridings in Canada. They will take their seat physically in the House of Commons, which will be quite a symbolic action. But beyond that, they will take part in leadership training, networking. They will meet with a variety of members of Parliament and other elected officials. And they will also take part in important policy discussions ranging on all sorts of issues. We're hoping to, beyond the commemoration, inspire these young women, if they haven't already been inspired, to run for office one day or to get more involved in politics.
What's most interesting, Catherine, is the fact that you yourself have run for office. What was it like?
It was an incredible opportunity, and I learned so much. But I also saw that it was difficult. The race that I ran in was municipal. I did not win, but I learned a lot. I was against. There were 6 people in my race, and they were all young men. So I was the only female and the only mother. And although I see that as a different and interesting perspective to bring to the table, it also brings about challenges, which I think is one of the many barriers that women face, is that for the most part we have more domestic responsibilities than men do, which makes it more difficult for simple things like spending time door knocking or calling potential voters. But it's important for me to champion this cause for that reason, because I do believe that voice as a mother, as a woman, brings about a different perspective that's very, very important in policymaking.
Also joining us on our program is Bing Arguelles. She's the Program Officer of Equitas, International Center for Human Rights Education. A very good morning to you, Bing, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning to you too, and thank you for having me.
Bing, how does the young women leaders concept feature in the work of your organization?
If I may, I would like to maybe quickly describe what is Equitas. Equitas is an international organization that's based in Montreal, and we are celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. And its focus is human rights education. Our programs are not only at the international level, we also have our programming in Canada that focuses on children and youth. And under that rubric of youth, we have the Young Women, Young Leaders program, wherein we have developed tools and have sort of come up with some good practices in terms of trying to engage young women into and make them participate in their communities. And these young women are usually those who don't have the privilege, who are belonging to the lower economic level,
Sure.
and don't really have much opportunities in terms of having their voice heard. So we started piloting it in 4 communities in Montreal, and from that we are bringing our knowledge, our experience, what we have gained from that exercise, and try to share it here with the High Commission's efforts in terms of developing young women leaders today and tomorrow. So yesterday, Catherine and I were engaged as resource persons for building capacity of the participants coming from these different countries in the region, as well as around 70 participants from Sri Lanka. And wherein Catherine spoke about increasing participation in Parliament, whereas I went into increasing participation at the community level. And I guess we did some good complementarity in our presentations.
Bing, you have a flagship program that's done by Equitas. Could
Yes.
you elaborate on that?
It's called the International Human Rights Training Program, wherein every year we bring in between 90 to 100 participants from around 60 countries around the world. It comprised of people from different sectors of society doing a lot of human rights education. They could be youth leaders, they could be teachers, they could be, but most of them are really coming from NGOs or civil society organizations. And during that 3-week program in Montreal, they learn how to be better, if not effective, human rights educators. And that program in Sri Lanka has produced around 50 alumni, and they have been involved in our programming here in Sri Lanka as well. If I can talk about our programming here, we're going into our second phase, which focuses on human rights, inclusion, and religious harmony. And in that program, we engage with religious leaders, community leaders, government representatives, as well as children and youth. I would also like to acknowledge that our programming here in Sri Lanka, the Phase 1 and the Phase 2, it's being supported by the Government of Canada.
All right, thank you very much for joining us on the first half of the show, Bing, Catherine, and Her Excellency Shelley Whiting. Thank you. With that, we're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newsline. We're joined by 3 amazing ladies. I was just in conversation with them during the break. We're here with Jalila Haider, who's an attorney at law, Shreya Ila Anasuya, and Adila Ahmadi. Good morning to you, ladies. Good morning. And it's a great meeting you and speaking with you. You are all passionate about women's rights and ensuring gender equality. Jalila, let's start off with you. You specialize in defending women's rights. You're from Pakistan. You also work towards ending domestic violence, sexual harassment, as well as enacting personal laws for minorities in Pakistan. What has the scope of your work really been?
Actually, Pakistan is very progressive. Like I can say that it's very pro-women. Like they support women laws, legislations, but still we have barriers, so many barriers, and it is at some extent we can say it's the reason of patriarchy. My work is most focused on women in conflict zone and the minorities. Making personal law for the minorities was because the most of the non-Muslim girls were subject to enforced conversion when they are in the age of very early age. So because there is no personal law implement for them. So we are part of some consultation and were part of some consultations to build some personal laws for them. There is a space as well as very difficulties on the other way, because women also want to get access to justice. But unfortunately, their economy does not allow them. So I give free legal aid to them to help and support them. Sometimes it is like, for me, it's very difficult. Like my own economy does not allow me to go. But I just, because it's my passion that every woman should trust on justice. So I invite them to have it and to struggle for them.
Adila is from Afghanistan and does a lot of work with regard to elimination of violence against women, promoting gender equality. Adila, tell us a bit about how important it is to ensure that the woman's rights are protected.
The women's rights, how it can be protected, and it is really important to have a gender equality. How we can achieve this? Through gender equality, we can achieve that women's right has been protected and throughout the community. And for women political participation, it is also one of the instruments, one of the crucial steps that women should be engaged in decision making, policy decision making levels, and also in the economic.
Adila, you're here in Sri Lanka for the Regional Young Women Leaders Dialogue. How important is it to include women, women's participation in the political sphere in Afghanistan? Is it being done at present?
Yes, exactly. In Afghanistan, we have lots of achievements still yet, and compared to the previous history of Afghanistan. Like we have 27% of women participation in parliament. We have women, 4 female ministers, and also 8 ambassadors across the country. And also now today, millions of girls are going to the school. And also thousands of girls and young women are going to the university. And now the women have found their place, that what to do and why we are here and what is our future plan and what we should accomplish in our lives. So this is the position of the women, and they are going the forward step, and they are taking the forward step.
Shreya, you are a writer as well as an activist. You join us from India, and you work on issues such as gender and sexuality. Can you elaborate on this?
Well, gender and sexuality are often interconnected, but they are separate issues. So there is the question of gender identity, which includes people, women as well as transgender people, as well as non-binary people, so people who don't identify either as male or female. And sexuality is to do with sexual orientation and expressions of sexuality. So by sexual orientation, I mean, LGBT people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual people, who fall outside of the sexuality norms, which are centered around heterosexuality and the marriage and family unit. And by sexuality, I also mean sexual expression. So women's sexual expression, which is often very taboo. The sexual expression of people with disabilities, which is often very taboo in India. So one of the things I do is I edit a blog called Sexuality and Disability, where I commission and edit women's writings, women who live with disabilities, their writings, on some of these subjects that are taboo. So relationships, parenting, sex, marriage, violence, often things are which are very present in the women's movement, in the non-disabled conversations. But when it comes to disability, these are silenced. These issues are silenced. And so the disability rights movements and the women's movements, we can't see them as separate. We have to look at, Audre Lorde once said that we don't live single issue lives. So we have to look at multiple issues. So that's some of what I do.
Well, that sounds fascinating. But Shreya, I need to ask you this. How has the reception been across India to your work and the work you do?
Well, a part of the work I do is with mainstream media. No matter how much we do with alternative media, we have to recognize that there are certain barriers. Alternative media doesn't reach everyone. So the blog is not necessarily reaching everybody, but it is giving women with disabilities the space to express themselves. But the other work I do reaches more, much larger numbers of people. So I, for example, have worked full-time in journalism at one point in my life. Not very far in the past, very recently. So I used to write a column called The Gender Beat, which was a unique space which curated news on gender and sexuality, not just from India, but from around the world, especially from underrepresented regions, continents like Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, which are not so well represented in mainstream Indian media. So what I was trying to do there, with the help of my editors, who are highly progressive, is talk about gender and sexuality not in the usual way, not just with women as passive, kind of victims, and kind of talk in a nuanced and complex fashion around issues and gender and sexuality, because these are very, very complex, large, multifaceted issues.
But you didn't answer my question.
Sorry.
The reception, yes.
My sense is that when these things are reaching people, some response is very positive because people are already open. I think we have to thank a large amount of women's rights activism that's already happened, as well as other movements that are around other issues such as caste and disability and labor, which are very interconnected with gender. So a lot of the reception is very positive, but we also make people uncomfortable when we do this. We also, because it's bound to make people uncomfortable when you're challenging something that is considered normal, that is considered something that can't be broken. When you're challenging deep-rooted stereotyping, deep-rooted discrimination, then of course people push back. But that's when we know we're doing the job right, because we have to make people think about stuff that makes them uncomfortable in order to move forward.
Moving forward is also the objective of Newsline. We're going for a short commercial break now. Jalila, Shreya and Adila, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back. You're with Newsline. We're joined by three more vibrant young personalities, Sharanya Sekaram, Wangchuk Dema and Isha Afif. Thank you, ladies, for joining us on this edition of Newsline. Let's start off with you, Sharanya. Your work revolves around peace building with a focus on gender and women. Now, Sri Lanka has emerged from an ethnic conflict that bruised an entire nation. We are on our way towards reconciliation, national unity, and transitional justice. As a young activist, do you see this as successful?
It's an interesting question because to answer that, you also have to, I think we need to understand that a peace process, whether it's focused on transitional justice or whether it's focused on a unity-based process or a reconciliation-based process, is not a final destination. It's a journey. I think we're on that journey. I think maybe what we need to do is take a step back and recognize that it is a journey. There's been a lot of focus on the destination, I feel, and not enough on the fact that it's a process. Because you're not just talking about one generation, you're talking about a generation that was there when the conflict began, a generation that was born into the conflict, and now a generation that's emerging that really doesn't know much about the conflict because they were either very young when it ended or very young towards the end of it. So while there have been immense steps taken forward, I don't think we've gone further back than we have gone forward, which is great. I also think that we have put a lot of focus on a destination and not enough focus on a journey.
Sharanya, what does your work revolve around in terms of women's rights and gender equality?
So in gender equality and women's rights, I've been focused mainly on civic and political engagement of youth, which has led to young women, mostly focusing on how we can have more young people and more young women engaged in political and civic processes. So, for example, when I was attached to International Alert, we ran some trainings and discourses with young people and focused on the young women about how they engage with civic and political processes. Because often activism works backwards. We first tell people what they want and then ask them what they want. And I find that often we need to go backwards and first ask the people what they want and what they feel they need before designing solutions or trainings for them.
Wangchuk, you join us from Bhutan. You are a youth social activist and you do a lot of work with regard to sexual and reproductive health and rights. What exactly does your work entail?
Sexual and reproductive health and rights. I'm sure the word sex is a taboo, not just to my country, Bhutan, but to the most parts of the world. So sexual and reproductive health and rights, basically, what I personally always have been doing is advocating young people on their importance of understanding sexual health as well as sexual rights, and not to forget reproductive health and rights as well. So Bhutan being a very conservative society, but I have to accept that we are opening up to the outside world at a greater speed. So still, apart from young people of my age, especially where I come from, the older generation, it's still a really huge, awkward topic for them. So understanding sexual and reproductive health and rights will improve the health of young people.
Wangchuk, what has the response been to you engaging in sexual and reproductive health and rights related work? Because as you said, Bhutan is a conservative country. How has the response been?
I've been talking to a lot of young people, and it's not just my opinion and based on my experiences, but also a lot of young people, both men and women, they have identified that there is a lack of advocacy in terms of SRHR for young people. So what I think is Bhutanese government has been doing a lot in terms of health services, and we are really grateful for the fact that our government has been providing us free, health care and medical services. But I think it has to go beyond that in terms of sexual and reproductive health services. Firstly, I think the importance of comprehensive sexuality education is very important. Not informal CSCs, but I think if there could be formal CSCs, comprehensive sexuality education in institutes like colleges and schools, and then people might be wondering that, like, how can a sex education be instituted in schools and especially for those very young boys and girls, above the age of maybe 8, 9, 10. So CSCs deals with age-appropriate, education that does not just focus on sex, but how to, improve their life skills, as well as, various relationships, not just romantic relationships, but friendships, relationships between siblings, between parents. So I think those aspects will really be, concentrated from CSC point of view.
Thank you, Vanshuk. My final set of questions is for Isha Afif from the Maldives. Now, Maldives has a very colorful political history. Your work revolves around youth engagement in civic and political life. How important is it to empower women towards political engagement?
Thank you. I think in the Maldivian context, we are a new democracy, and there are a lot of issues that we are struggling with as we try to embrace the democratic process. But it's important to have women and young girls involved in this process, because ultimately those are the most vulnerable communities within the country. And so to have them at a representative level that is making decisions, that is making policy level decisions, is important. So as to identify what are the areas in their life that can be improved upon. So as such, young people and young girls and women need to be at least involved in the consultation process of policy making, the consultation process of decision making by cabinet members, and any of the other processes that is relevant to the nation, because what is relevant to the nation is relevant to the women of the country.
Interestingly, Isha, you work on a project called Democracy Cafe. Could you elaborate on that?
Democracy Cafe is a recent project that my organization, Maldivian Democracy Network, started with the help of Canadian Fund for Local Initiatives. And the aim of the project is to get more young people engaged in civic and political life. A recent survey by Transparency Maldives shows that more and more young people are disillusioned about politics of the country. While most young people are aware of what's going on, they don't necessarily believe that they can be part of the process. They feel quite alienated from it. Through Democracy Cafe, we have information sessions. We bring in different people from different backgrounds who have kind of struggled to bring democracy to the country, who have struggled with women's issues, with environmental issues, so they can share their experiences and they can pass the torch forward to these young people who know that they already have a mentor that they can look up to, but that they can also use their own knowledge to come up with innovative new ways of tackling the issues that have not been solved yet. Additionally, at Democracy Cafe, we look at transitional movements across the world. We look at South Asia, we look at South America, and then we try to learn from the global context and we try to apply that in a local context and see where we've gone wrong. Most Maldivians are not very academically aware of politics because it is not taught in the country. It's a very recent thing to be teaching politics in the country. So through Democracy Cafe, we're creating this engagement space for young people, and we call it a metaphorical space because it's just a room and it's safe, and they can talk about these things that they can't talk about on the streets, that they can't talk about at coffee tables anymore, knowing that they have the space to talk and that there will be people that might disagree with them, but it's still open for dialogue.
Absolutely inspiring ideas from these young women leaders joining us on this edition of Newsline. Thank you very much, Isha, Wangshuk and Sharanya, for joining us. Of course, we'd also like to extend a warm thank you to the Canadian High Commissioner here in Sri Lanka, Her Excellency Shelley Whiting, for hosting us at her official residence in Colombo 7.